Ms. Alice Delacroix, you have 5 minutes to sign this document or your family will lose everything. I was in the middle of taking a bite of my ham sandwich when the lawyer's words pierced my ears like an ambulance siren. The bread stuck in my throat, and for a moment I thought I'd die choking right there, in the most elegant office I'd ever set foot in. "Excuse me?" I managed to stammer, still chewing desperately.
5 minutes for what? The man in the impeccable suit adjusted his glasses and repeated with the patience of someone explaining math to a 5-year-old. Contract marriage, 12 months, $200,000 at the end, plus all your family's debts paid off. My head started spinning. 3 hours ago, I was happily organizing cupcakes at my grandmother's bakery, worried only about not burning the next batch of chocolate truffles. Now I was sitting in a leather chair that probably cost more than my car, hearing about marriage? Wait. I raised my hand as if asking to use the bathroom at school. Are you guys serious? Real marriage? To whom? Why me? The office door opened with a soft click, and my heart practically jumped out the 30th floor window. In walked the most irritatingly gorgeous man I'd ever seen in my life. Tall, with perfectly tousled black hair, storm-colored eyes, and an expression that screamed, "I can buy your soul and still have change left over." He wore a suit that seemed to have been sewn by angels and walked as if the entire world was his personal runway. "Sorry for the delay," he said, and even his voice was irritatingly perfect, deep, velvety, with a slight accent I couldn't identify. "I hope you've already explained the terms to Miss Alice," I completed automatically, then hated myself for responding so quickly. He looked me up and down with an expression that varied between disdain and curiosity. It was hard to decipher. "Michael Johnson," he introduced himself, extending his hand. Of course his name was Michael Johnson. Probably lived in a penthouse and had a helicopter. "Mike," he said, noticing my hesitation. "You can call me Mike." I shook his hand, and it was like receiving an electric shock. His fingers were long, warm, and for a ridiculous second I thought about how it would feel to have them. "Focus, Alice," I screamed mentally. "So," I began, pulling my hand back and trying to look professional. "You're the fake groom?" He arched an eyebrow. "That's an interesting way to put it. Well, it's not like it's real, right?" I rolled my eyes. "I mean, look at me and look at you. We both know this is purely commercial." Something passed across his face, too quick for me to capture what it was. "Purely commercial," he repeated, his voice a tone colder. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have deadlines to meet. Ms. Delacroix, your family owes $23,000 in back taxes. The deadline expires tomorrow. Without this agreement, they lose the bakery," I finished, feeling my stomach sink to my feet. The Sweet Home Bakery was everything to my grandmother Estelle. She and my grandfather built the business from scratch, brick by brick, recipe by recipe. It was where I learned to make chocolate truffles at age 6, where I cried over my first heartbreak at 16, where I dreamed of working forever. "Why me?" I asked again, this time looking directly at Mike. "There are thousands of women more, suitable for this." He gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Because you won't fall in love with me." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was such a loud and unexpected laugh that even the lawyer startled. "Sorry," I said, still laughing. "It's just, wow, what an ego." His half smile transformed into a real smile, and damn, it was even more disturbing. "It's not ego, Alice. It's experience." "Oh, of course, because you're irresistible, and all women fall at your feet, right?" I teased, feeling an idiotic courage rise in my chest. "Let me tell you something, Mr. Michael Johnson. I've seen handsome men before. I work at a bakery downtown. I see charming executives every day buying cupcakes to impress their girlfriends. You're nothing special." Blatant lie. He was absolutely special, and we both knew it. "Perfect," he said, and there was something dangerous glinting in his eyes. "Then we won't have any problems." The lawyer tapped his pen on the table. 3 minutes, miss. I looked at the contract in front of me. 12 months of my life in exchange for my family's salvation. It seemed simple on paper, but something told me that nothing involving Michael Johnson would be simple. Are there any bizarre clauses in there? I asked, flipping through the pages. Like, do I have to wear only red dresses or pretend I like opera? Mike leaned back in his chair, clearly amused. Just the basics. You live in my house, we accompany each other to social events, and we keep the charade convincing for my family. Your family? My grandmother is concerned about my personal life. She believes that a single man at 32 is a national tragedy. And is it? Is what? A national tragedy? He laughed softly, a sound that made my stomach do somersaults. I misjudged you, Alice. You're going to be more fun than I imagined. 1 minute, announced the lawyer. I took a deep breath. $23,000. The bakery. Grandma Estelle's dream. My own sanity. If I sign this, I said slowly, how do I know you'll keep your part? Mike got up and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. For a moment he contemplated the city below. You don't know, he said finally, but I never break a deal, Alice. Never. There was something in his voice, an unshakable certainty that made me believe him. Time's up, said the lawyer. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled slightly. Just one more question, I said, the pen hovering over the paper. Why 12 months? Why not 6 or 24? Mike turned from the window, and our eyes met. For a second, I saw something vulnerable pass across his face. Because, he said softly, 12 months is enough time to convince my grandmother. But not so much that... He hesitated. That what? That we complicate things. I signed my name with a dramatic flourish that would have made my calligraphy teacher proud. Done, I said, dropping the pen. Now we're officially fake engaged. Mike came back closer to me, and I swore I could feel the heat emanating from him. Welcome to the family, future Mrs. Johnson. And that's how, on any given Tuesday in October, I became the fake fiancé of the most impossible, and impossible to ignore, man I'd ever met. What could go wrong? This is your new home. I stared at the mansion in front of me. And yes, it was definitely a mansion, not a house, trying to pick my jaw up off the ground. 3 stories of pristine white stone, floor-to-ceiling windows, and enough greenery to hide a small army. You live here? I asked, clutching my single suitcase like a security blanket. Alone? Mike walked ahead of me, his long strides making me practically jog to keep up. Not anymore. The front door was opened by an older woman with silver hair pulled into a perfect bun and a smile that could melt glaciers. You must be Alice, she exclaimed, and before I could react, I was engulfed in a hug that smelled like vanilla and home. I'm Margaret, the housekeeper, though around here I'm more like family. Nice to meet you, I managed, still reeling from the warmth of her welcome. Margaret. Mike's voice carried a warning tone. Alice needs to settle in. She's had a long day. Of course, dear. Margaret winked at me. Men never understand that a proper welcome is exactly what someone needs after a long day. Come, Alice, let me show you to your room. As we climbed a staircase that belonged in a museum, Margaret chatted away. I've prepared the blue room for you. It has the best view of the garden. And don't worry about Mike's grumpiness. He's been impossible to live with for months. A wife is exactly what he needs. My stomach twisted. Oh, we're not really married yet, I know, Margaret interrupted with a knowing smile. But engaged couples need their privacy too. Your room is right next to his. Next to his. Of course it was. The blue room was 3 times the size of my entire apartment, with a bed that could sleep a football team and windows overlooking what looked like Central Park's prettier cousin. Dinner is at 7, Margaret said, setting my pathetic suitcase on a chair that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Don't be late. Mike gets cranky when his blood sugar drops. After she left,
I collapsed on the bed and stared at the ceiling. What had I gotten myself into? 24 hours ago, my biggest worry was whether we had enough chocolate chips for tomorrow's cookies. Now I was living in a palace, pretending to be engaged to a man who made my pulse race and my brain short-circuit simultaneously. A knock on the door interrupted my existential crisis. "Come in," I called. Mike appeared, having changed from his business suit into dark jeans and a white button-down that somehow made him look even more dangerous. How was that even possible? "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "About ground rules." He leaned against the doorframe, and I tried not to notice how the casual pose made his muscles. "Focus, Alice. My grandmother visits every Sunday. She's observant." "Meaning?" "Meaning she'll know immediately if we're faking this." I sat up straighter. "So what do you suggest? Method acting? Should I practice gazing at you adoringly?" Something flickered in his eyes. "That won't be necessary. Just don't contradict me in front of her. And try to look like you don't completely despise me." "I don't despise you," I said automatically, then immediately regretted the admission. "No?" He moved closer to the bed, and my traitorous heart started doing gymnastics. "What do you think of me then, Alice?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with something I didn't want to analyze. I stood up quickly, putting distance between us. "I think you're complicated," I said finally. "And I think there's a lot you're not telling me about why you need a fake wife." "Maybe there is. Care to share?" "Not particularly." I crossed my arms. "Look, if we're going to sell this to your family, don't you think I should know the basic facts? Like why a successful, ridiculously good-looking guy like you needs to hire a wife." "You think I'm ridiculously good-looking?" Heat flooded my cheeks. "That's not the point." "Isn't it?" He stepped closer again, and this time I held my ground, even though every nerve ending was screaming at me to run. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like a very important point. Michael." I tried to make my voice stern, but it came out breathier than intended. "Stop." "Stop what?" "Whatever you're doing. This flirting thing. We both agreed this was purely business." "Did we?" His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Because I don't remember putting that in the contract." Before I could respond, before I could even think, Margaret's voice echoed from downstairs. "Dinner." Mike stepped back immediately, his expression shuddering closed. "We should go down." The dining room was as intimidating as the rest of the house, with a table that could seat 20 and enough crystal to blind someone. Mike sat at the head, gesturing for me to take the seat to his right. Margaret served what looked like a 5-star restaurant meal, complete with wine I was afraid to pronounce. "So," I said, cutting into what might have been the most expensive piece of chicken in history, "tell me about this grandmother of yours. What's she like?" "Formidable," Mike said without hesitation. "She built the family business from nothing, survived the Great Depression, buried 2 husbands, and still does the New York Times crossword in pen every morning. She sounds amazing." "She is. She's also determined to see me married before she—" He trailed off. "Before she what?" Mike set down his fork. "She's sick, Alice. Cancer. The doctors say she has maybe 6 months." My chest tightened. "I'm so sorry. She doesn't know I know. She's trying to protect me and I'm trying to protect her. It's a very dysfunctional dance we're doing." "And you think giving her the wedding she wants will make her happy?" "I think," he said quietly, "that seeing me settled, knowing I won't be alone when she's gone, might give her some peace." I stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time. This wasn't about convenience or business deals. This was about love. Desperate, protective, heartbreaking love for the woman who raised him. "Why me?" I asked softly. "Really? Why not hire some sophisticated socialite who knows which fork to use for fish?" Mike met my eyes across the table. "Because when you laughed at me today, it was the first genuine reaction I've gotten from a woman in years. Because you signed that contract to save your family, not for the money, and because my grandmother is going to love you, warm and dangerous. This was bad. This was very, very bad.
So, I said, trying to lighten the mood. Any other family members I should know about? Eccentric uncles? Disapproving cousins? Mike's smile was rueful. Just grandmother. My parents died when I was 15. Car accident. I'm sorry. Don't be. Grandmother gave me everything I needed. Sometimes I think she gave me too much. Meaning? Meaning she never let me fail at anything. Never let me struggle. Never let me figure out who I really was underneath all the money and expectations. I looked at this powerful man admitting his vulnerabilities and felt something shift inside me. Something dangerous and wonderful and absolutely terrifying. Well, I said, raising my wine glass in a mock toast, here's to 12 months of figuring it out. He clinked his glass against mine, his eyes never leaving my face. To 12 months, he agreed. Neither of us mentioned that 12 months suddenly felt both like forever and nowhere near long enough. She's here. I looked up from where I was nervously arranging flowers in the living room for the 5th time. Mike stood in the doorway, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. Already? But it's only 11:30. You said she comes at noon. Grandmother doesn't believe in being fashionably late. She considers it a character flaw. He straightened his tie, a nervous gesture I was beginning to recognize. Are you ready for this? Was I ready to meet the woman who could see through lies like X-ray vision? The woman whose opinion could make or break this entire charade? Absolutely not. Ready as I'll ever be, I lied, smoothing down my dress for the 100th time. Margaret had helped me choose the outfit. A navy blue dress that was elegant without being trying too hard, paired with pearl earrings that had belonged to my own grandmother. I looked respectable, I hoped. Like someone who could believably capture the heart of Michael Johnson. The front door opened with a commanding presence that seemed to change the very air in the house. I heard heels clicking on marble, a walking stick tapping, and a voice that could cut glass. Michael, darling, where is this mysterious fiancé I've been hearing about? My heart stopped. This was it. She appeared in the doorway like a queen surveying her kingdom, silver hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a powder blue suit that probably cost more than my car, and eyes so sharp they could perform surgery. Despite using a walking stick, she carried herself with the bearing of someone who had conquered the world before breakfast. Grandmother, Mike said, moving to kiss her cheek. You look beautiful. Flattery will get you nowhere, young man. But her eyes softened as she patted his face. Now where is she? Mike turned to me, extending his hand. Grandmother, I'd like you to meet Alice Delacroix. Alice, this is my grandmother, Eleanor Johnson. I stepped forward, trying to channel every etiquette lesson my mother had ever forced on me. But before I could even attempt a polite handshake, Eleanor Johnson was studying me with the intensity of a scientist examining a new species. Well, she said, after what felt like an eternity, you're not what I expected. My stomach dropped. Oh, I'm sorry if... Don't apologize, child. I expected another one of those vapid socialites my grandson usually parades around. Instead, I find someone with actual substance in her eyes. She smiled, and it transformed her entire face. Much better. Relief flooded through me so fast I nearly swayed. Come here, dear, Eleanor commanded, opening her arms. Let me properly welcome my new granddaughter. Her hug was surprisingly strong, and she smelled like expensive perfume and peppermints. When she pulled back, her eyes were suspiciously bright. Now then, she said briskly, settling into the chair Mike held out for her. Tell me everything. How did you two meet? When did you know? And please spare me any sanitized version. I want the real story. Mike and I exchanged a quick glance. We hadn't prepared for this. We should have prepared for this. We met at Alice's bakery, Mike said smoothly. I was having the worst day of my life, and she, well, she made it better. I stared at him. That wasn't entirely untrue, considering our actual meeting yesterday. But there was something in his voice that made it sound almost real. A bakery? Eleanor's eyebrows rose. How wonderfully normal. And you, Alice? What did you think of my grandson when you first saw him? This I could answer honestly. I thought he was trouble, I said without hesitation. Definitely the kind of man who was used to getting his way and probably had an ego the size of Manhattan. Eleanor burst into delighted laughter. Oh, I like her. She has you figured out completely, doesn't she, Michael? Mike's smile was rueful. Completely. And when did you know you loved him? Eleanor asked, leaning forward with the eager expression of someone about to hear her favorite story. The question hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth, then closed it, panic rising in my throat. How was I supposed to answer that? How could I fake that kind of emotion? I started, then stopped, looking helplessly at Mike. But he was looking at me with such intensity that for a moment I forgot we were acting. His eyes were soft, vulnerable, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. She hasn't said it yet, he said, still looking at me, but I'm hoping she will. Soon. The way he said it, the raw honesty in his voice, made my breath catch. For a second, a crazy second, I almost believed he meant it. Eleanor was watching us both with eyes that missed nothing. I see, she said quietly. And you, Alice? How do you feel about my grandson? I looked at Mike, at this complicated man who was pretending to love me to make his dying grandmother happy, and felt something dangerous unfurl in my chest. I think, I said carefully, that he's nothing like what I expected, and that sometimes the best things in life are the ones that surprise you. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was true. Truer than I wanted to admit. Eleanor smiled. Wise words. Now, I insist you both join me for lunch. I want to hear everything about this romance, and I want to see if you two can manage to look at each other without blushing for more than 5 minutes. Lunch was a masterclass in subtle interrogation. Eleanor asked seemingly innocent questions about our relationship, while watching our every reaction. Where had our first date been? A quick improvisation about a disaster at a fancy restaurant that ended with us eating pizza on a park bench. What were our pet peeves about each other? I complained about Mike's obsession with punctuality. He mentioned my tendency to rearrange furniture when nervous. What were our plans for the future? That last question created an awkward silence until Mike smoothly changed the subject to Eleanor's garden. But it was the smaller moments that nearly undid me. The way Mike automatically refilled my water glass. How he laughed, really laughed, at my story about accidentally dyeing an entire batch of cupcakes purple. The moment his hand brushed mine when we both reached for the salt, and neither of us pulled away immediately. Alice, dear, Eleanor said as Margaret served dessert. Would you mind terribly if I stole my grandson for a few minutes? There's something I need to discuss with him privately. Of course, I said, trying not to feel like I was about to be graded on my performance. They disappeared into Mike's study, leaving me alone with my rapidly beating heart and the growing realization that I was in serious trouble. When they returned 20 minutes later, Eleanor looked pleased and Mike looked shaken. Well, Eleanor announced, gathering her purse, I have to say, this has been delightful. Alice, you are exactly what this stubborn grandson of mine needs. Someone who won't let him take himself too seriously. Thank you, I managed. She kissed Mike goodbye, then surprised me by taking my hands in her surprisingly strong grip. Take care of him, dear, she said softly. He pretends to be tougher than he is. After she left, the house felt strangely empty. Mike and I stood in the foyer, the silence stretching between us like a live wire. Well, I said finally, I think that went. She knows, Mike interrupted. My heart stopped. What? She knows we're faking this. He ran a hand through his hair, destroying its perfect styling. She told me she's not an idiot.
that she's seen enough fake relationships to recognize one, and that if I think I can fool her with some elaborate charade, I'm mistaken. Oh God. I sank onto the nearest chair. I'm so sorry, I tried, but… Alice. His voice was gentle. She also said she doesn't care. What? She said she can see that I care about you, even if I haven't figured it out yet, and that you care about me, even if you're fighting it. She said sometimes the best love stories start with the worst reasons. I stared at him, my mind reeling. And what did you tell her? Mike looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I told her she was right. The admission hung in the air between us, dangerous and electric and absolutely terrifying. Because the scariest part wasn't that Eleanor had seen through our charade. The scariest part was that she might be right. We need to practice. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been pretending to work on bakery inventory, while actually Googling how to fake being in love without actually falling in love, which unsurprisingly yielded 0 helpful results. Mike stood in the doorway of the library, having changed from his business suit into jeans and a gray sweater that made his eyes look like storm clouds. It had been 3 days since Eleanor's visit, 3 days of tiptoeing around each other like we were defusing a bomb. Practice what exactly? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I knew. Being a couple. We have the Morrison Charity Gala tomorrow night. 500 of New York's elite, all watching to see if Michael Johnson's mysterious fiancée is worthy of him. No pressure at all, I muttered. He moved into the room and I noticed he was carrying 2 wine glasses and a bottle that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Liquid courage, he explained, setting them on the coffee table. For both of us. Are you nervous? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Terrified, he admitted, and his honesty caught me off guard. These people have known me since I was in diapers. They'll spot a fake relationship from across the room. I accepted the wine he handed me, our fingers brushing in what was becoming a disturbingly familiar electric moment. So what do you suggest? A crash course in couple behavior? Something like that. He sat on the couch next to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, that intoxicating mixture of cedar and something uniquely him. Tell me about your last relationship. Excuse me? If we're going to convince people we're crazy about each other, I need to know how you act when you're actually crazy about someone. Heat flooded my cheeks. That's pretty personal. Alice, in approximately 18 hours, I'm going to have to look at you like you're the center of my universe, while 36 photographers document it for the society pages. I think we're past worrying about personal boundaries. He had a point. A very good, very annoying point. Fine, I said, taking a fortifying sip of wine. His name was David. We dated for 2 years. I thought he was going to propose, but instead he ran off with his yoga instructor to find himself in Costa Rica. Ouch. Yeah, well, apparently I was too grounded for his spiritual journey. I laughed, but it came out bitter. Funny thing is, I realized I wasn't actually heartbroken about losing him. I was heartbroken about losing the idea of him, you know? Mike was studying me with that intense focus that made me feel like he could see straight through to my soul. What about you? I asked, desperate to shift the spotlight off myself. Last relationship? Victoria Ashford. We dated for 8 months. Everyone assumed we'd get married. Our families have been friends for generations. We looked perfect together in photos. We never fought. Sounds ideal. It was. That was the problem. He swirled his wine, staring into it like it held answers. There was no passion, no fire, no spark. We were like 2 well-dressed mannequins going through the motions. What happened? She broke up with me via text message while I was in a board meeting. Said she'd met someone who made her feel alive, and that she was sorry, but she'd never felt that way with me. Ouch, I echoed his earlier sentiment. The worst part? I was relieved. He looked at me then, and something in his expression made my breath catch. I realized I'd never felt that way about anyone either. That spark everyone talks about? I was starting to think it was just a myth. The air between us felt charged, dangerous. I should have changed the subject, made a joke, done something to break the tension. Instead, I heard myself asking, "And now?" He held my gaze. Now I'm not so sure it's a myth. My heart was doing acrobatics in my chest. This was dangerous territory. This was the exact opposite of keeping things professional. "Mike," I started, but he was already moving closer. "We should practice," he said softly. "Dancing. At the gala, they'll expect us to dance." Before I could protest, he was standing, extending his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Delacroix?" There was no music, but somehow that didn't matter. I placed my hand in his and let him pull me to my feet. His other hand settled on my waist, warm and steady, while mine found its way to his shoulder. We moved slowly in the silence, and it was more intimate than any dance I'd ever shared. No orchestra could have provided better music than the sound of our synchronized breathing, the whisper of fabric, the thundering of my pulse in my ears. "Look at me," he murmured. And when I did, the intensity in his eyes nearly undid me. "At the gala, people will be watching us. They'll want to see that we can't take our eyes off each other." "Like this?" I whispered, letting myself get lost in those storm-gray depths. "Exactly like that." His voice was rough, strained. "You're a quick learner. I have a good teacher." We were barely moving now, barely breathing. His thumb traced small circles on my waist, and I felt like I might spontaneously combust. "Alice," he said, my name like a prayer on his lips. "Yes?" "We should probably stop." "Probably," I agreed, but neither of us moved. Instead, we stood there in the golden lamplight, swaying to music only we could hear, pretending this was just practice when we both knew it was something else entirely. It was Margaret's voice calling about dinner that finally broke the spell. "Dinner's ready," she announced cheerfully from the doorway, then stopped short when she saw us. A knowing smile spread across her face. "Oh, don't mind me. Take your time, lovebirds." We sprang apart like we'd been electrocuted. I smoothed my hair while Mike cleared his throat and adjusted his sweater. "We were just practicing," I said weakly. "Of course you were, dear," Margaret said with barely contained glee. "Practicing. For the gala tomorrow. Very important to practice." After she left, we stood there in awkward silence, the spell completely broken. "That was," I started. "Practice," Mike finished firmly. "Just practice." "Right, practice." But as we headed to dinner, I caught him glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. That hadn't felt like practice at all. At dinner, we made small talk about the weather and the upcoming gala, both of us carefully avoiding any mention of what had just happened. But every accidental brush of hands, every shared laugh, every moment our eyes met across the table felt charged with new meaning. "You'll need a dress for tomorrow," Mike said as Margaret served dessert. I took the liberty of having a few options sent over. They should arrive in the morning. "You bought me dresses?" "Consider it part of the costume," he said, but there was something careful in his tone. "We need you to look the part." "What part exactly? Trophy wife?" "My equal," he said without hesitation. "Someone who belongs at my side not because of what I can give her, but because she chooses to be there." The sincerity in his voice made my chest tight. This man was going to be the death of me. "Mike," I said softly, "what are we doing here? Really?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I have no idea, Alice, but I'm terrified to stop." That night, lying in my too-big bed in my too-perfect room, I stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what was happening to me. This was supposed to be simple. A business arrangement. 12 months of playing house to save my family and give his grandmother peace. Instead, I was falling for a man who might be falling for me too, but who was paying me to pretend to love him. How was I supposed to tell the difference between what was real and what was performance? And more terrifyingly, did I even want to know the answer? "You look—" Mike's voice trailed off as I descended the staircase, and for a moment I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe the midnight blue silk dress was too much, too elegant, too obviously expensive for someone like me to pull off. But then I saw his expression, pure, unguarded awe, and suddenly I felt like I could conquer the world. "Beautiful," he finished, his voice rough. "You look absolutely beautiful." The dress fit, like it had been made for me, which it probably had been, considering the small army of tailors who'd descended on the house that morning. The silk hugged my curves without being inappropriate, and the color made my eyes look like sapphires. I'd never worn anything so expensive in my life, and I'd certainly never felt so beautiful. "You clean up pretty well yourself," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. That was the understatement of the century. Mike in a tuxedo should have come with a warning label. The black jacket emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, and the way he'd styled his hair, slightly less perfect than usual, made him look like he'd stepped off a magazine cover. "Shall we?" He offered his arm, and I took it, trying to ignore the way his muscles flexed under my fingers. The Morrison Charity Gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, because apparently when you're rich enough, you can just rent out world-famous museums for your parties. The red carpet was swarming with photographers, and my stomach clenched as our limousine pulled up. "Remember," Mike murmured as the driver came around to open our door, "we're madly in love. Try to look like you can't imagine being anywhere else." "That shouldn't be hard," I said without thinking, then immediately wanted to take it back. But Mike smiled, a real soft smile that made my heart flutter dangerously. "Ready?" he asked. The door opened, and suddenly we were in a world of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Mike's hand found the small of my back, steady and possessive, as we walked the red carpet. "Michael, over here. Who's the lucky lady? Is it true you're engaged?" Alice, look this way." I was stunned they already knew my name, but Mike seemed unsurprised. Of course, the gossip mill had been working overtime since Eleanor's visit. "Just smile and look at me," he whispered, turning so we were facing each other. "Block out everything else." It was surprisingly easy to follow his advice. When I looked into his eyes, the chaos around us faded to background noise. There was only him, only us, only this moment that felt more real than anything in my carefully constructed life. "Perfect," he murmured, and I wasn't sure if he was talking to me or about me. Inside the museum, the party was in full swing. The main hall had been transformed into a winter wonderland, with white flowers and crystal chandeliers casting everything in a magical glow. Waiters circulated with champagne and canapes that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. "Michael, darling." A woman in her 50s with perfect blonde hair and predatory smile descended on us like a shark scenting blood. "Vivian," Mike said smoothly, pressing a kiss to her cheek. "You look lovely. This is my fiancée, Alice Delacroix." "Alice, this is Vivian Morrison, our hostess." "So you're the mysterious woman who finally captured our Michael," Vivian said, looking me up and down like she was appraising livestock. "How fascinating. And what is it you do, dear?" "I run a bakery," I said, lifting my chin. I wasn't ashamed of my work, regardless of what this woman thought. How quaint. Vivian's smile could have cut glass. "I'm sure it's very fulfilling working with your hands." The condescension was so thick I could have choked on it. But before I could respond, Mike's arm tightened around my waist. "Alice creates magic," he said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "Her grandmother's bakery is an institution. The mayor himself orders his birthday cake from there every year." It wasn't true. We'd never made a cake for the mayor. But Mike delivered the lie with such conviction that even I almost believed it. "How wonderful," Vivian said, though her smile remained razor-sharp. "Well, you simply must try the canapes. They're from Delacroix, no relation, I assume." "None at all," I said sweetly, "though I notice they're a bit heavy on the salt." Amateur mistake. Mike coughed to cover what sounded suspiciously like a laugh. How astute, Vivian said, her smile faltering slightly. Well, do enjoy the evening. As she glided away, Mike leaned down to whisper in my ear. Remind me never to get on your bad side. She started it, I said defensively, then caught sight of his expression. What? Nothing. It's just, I've never seen anyone handle Vivian Morrison like that. She's been the queen bee of New York society for 20 years. Well, maybe it's time someone reminded her that being rich doesn't give you the right to be cruel. Something shifted in Mike's expression. Something warm and proud and dangerous. Dance with me, he said suddenly. Now? Right now. He led me onto the dance floor, where other couples were swaying to a string quartet. But when Mike pulled me into his arms, I forgot about everyone else. You're staring, I murmured as we moved together. I can't help it. You're magnificent. The way he said it, like it was a simple fact rather than flattery, made my knees weak. Mike, I know, he said softly. This is supposed to be pretend. Is it? The question slipped out before I could stop it. He spun me gently, then pulled me back against him, closer than we'd been before. I don't know anymore, he admitted. When Vivian was condescending to you, all I wanted to do was tell her that you're worth 10 of her. When you smiled at me on the red carpet, I forgot we were performing. When I hold you like this. What? I whispered. When I hold you like this, I can't remember why I ever thought I needed to fake loving you. My breath caught. Around us the party continued, but we might as well have been alone in the universe. This is crazy, I said. Completely insane, he agreed. We have a contract. The worst idea I've ever had. It's only been a week. Longest week of my life. I looked up at him. This complicated man who was supposed to be nothing more than a business arrangement, and felt my carefully constructed walls crumbling. What happens now? I asked. I have no idea, he said honestly. But Alice, I need you to know something. What? Whatever happens, whatever this is between us, you've already changed my life. In 1 week, you've made me feel more alive than I have in years. Before I could respond, before I could even process what he'd said, someone tapped Mike on the shoulder. Mind if I cut in? We turned to find a man about Mike's age with sandy hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mike's entire body tensed. Richard, he said coolly, I didn't expect to see you here. Wouldn't miss it for the world, especially when I heard you were bringing a date. Figured I should meet the woman brave enough to take on Michael Johnson. There was something in his tone that set my teeth on edge, but Mike was already stepping back, releasing me with obvious reluctance. Of course, Alice, this is Richard Ashford. Richard, my fiancée, Alice Delacroix. Ashford, as in Victoria Ashford, as in Mike's ex-girlfriend's brother. Charmed, Richard said, taking my hand and pulling me into a dance before I could protest. So tell me, Alice, what's your secret? Excuse me? My sister dated Michael for 8 months and never got so much as a spark out of him. Yet here you are, and the man looks like he's ready to burn down the world for you. What's your secret? I glanced over his shoulder to where Mike stood watching us, his expression carefully neutral, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Maybe, I said carefully, your sister was dating the wrong man. Richard laughed, but it wasn't pleasant. Oh, I like you. You've got fire. Just remember, Alice, men like Michael Johnson don't settle down with girls like you. They have fun, they move on, and they leave broken hearts in their wake. Girls like me? You know what I mean. I absolutely did know what he meant, and it made my blood boil. Actually, I don't, I said with dangerous sweetness. Why don't you explain it to me? Before Richard could respond, Mike was there, his hand on Richard's shoulder. I believe this dance is over, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Richard released me with obvious reluctance. Of course. Lovely meeting you, Alice. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other." As he walked away, Mike turned to me, concern written all over his face. "Are you all right? What did he say to you?" "Nothing important," I said, forcing a smile. "Just reminding me of my place." Mike's jaw tightened. "Alice, it's fine," I said quickly. "Really? People like that. They say things to get under your skin. I won't let him." But even as I said it, Richard's words echoed in my head. "Men like Michael Johnson don't settle down with girls like you." Maybe he was right. Maybe this was all just a beautiful dream that would end with me heartbroken and him moving on to someone more suitable. But as Mike pulled me back into his arms, as he looked at me like I was the most precious thing in his world, I decided I didn't care. Even if this ended in heartbreak, even if Richard was right, this moment, this perfect, impossible moment, was worth the risk. The morning after the gala, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly. Groggily, I reached for it, squinting at the screen. 12 missed calls from my best friend Sarah, 6 from my grandmother, and about 30 text messages. The first text from Sarah made my blood run cold. "OMG, Alice. You're on the front page of the Herald. Why didn't you tell me you were dating a billionaire?" My hands shaking, I Googled my own name. The results made my stomach drop to the floor. There we were, Mike and I, on the front page of the New York Herald Society section. The headline read, "Mystery Woman Captures Manhattan's Most Eligible Bachelor." But it wasn't the main article that terrified me. It was the smaller piece below it. "From Rags to Riches, the Cinderella story behind Alice Delacroix." The article detailed everything. My family's financial troubles, the bakery's mounting debts, even the fact that we'd received an eviction notice last month. They'd somehow discovered that Mike had paid off our debts the day after we signed the contract. I felt sick. A soft knock on my door interrupted my panic spiral. "Alice, it's Margaret. Mr. Johnson would like to see you in his study." "I'll be right there," I called, my voice barely steady. I threw on jeans and a sweater, not caring that my hair was a mess or that I looked like I'd been hit by a truck. The walk to Mike's study felt like a death march. He was standing by the window when I entered, still in yesterday's tuxedo shirt, now wrinkled and untucked. His hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "You've seen it," he said without turning around. "How?" I whispered. "How did they find out?" "Richard." Mike's voice was flat, emotionless. "He had you investigated the moment he heard about our engagement. Old family friend of the Herald's editor. So he knows about the contract, about everything. He knows about the money. He knows about the timing. He doesn't have proof of the contract itself, but—" Mike finally turned to face me, and the anguish in his eyes nearly broke me. "Alice, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "What does this mean?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "It means Richard is going to destroy both of us unless I give him what he wants." "Which is?" "My shares in Johnson Industries. He's been trying to buy them for years, trying to gain control of the company. This gives him the leverage he needs." I stared at him, pieces clicking into place. "Your family company, the one your grandmother built. The one she's leaving to me because she trusts me to protect her legacy." His laugh was bitter. "Some job I'm doing. There has to be another way." "There is." Mike moved to his desk, picked up a document I hadn't noticed. "We end this. Now, I tear up the contract, you go back to your life, and I deal with the fallout." "And your grandmother?" "I'll figure something else out." I looked at the contract in his hands. Our contract, the piece of paper that had changed both our lives. "Is that what you want?" "What I want." Mike set the document down and moved closer to me, close enough that I could see the exhaustion and pain written all over his face. "What I want is to protect you from this mess. What I want is to go back to last night, to that moment on the dance floor when nothing else mattered." "Mike." "What I want," he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, is to tell you that somewhere between signing that ridiculous contract and this morning, I fell in love with you. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been hoping for them, dreading them, dreaming about them. Now that they were real, hanging in the air between us, I didn't know what to do with them. "Don't," I said, stepping back. "Don't say that." "Why not?" "It's true." "Because it makes this harder." The words exploded out of me. "Because I fell in love with you too, and now I don't know what's real anymore." Mike went very still. "You love me?" "Of course I love you." I was crying now, hot tears streaming down my face. "I love the way you take care of Margaret like she's family. I love how you light up when you talk about your grandmother. I love that you paid my family's debts before you even knew me, just because you're fundamentally good. I love your terrible morning hair, and the way you make that face when you're concentrating, and how you always refill my water glass without thinking about it. Alice, but don't you see? How can I trust these feelings when they started with a lie? How do I know I'm not just playing a role so well that I convinced myself it was real?" Mike closed the distance between us in 2 strides, taking my face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "Because," he said, wiping away my tears with his thumbs, "roles don't make your heart race when someone walks into a room. Performances don't make you laugh until your sides hurt at terrible jokes. Acting doesn't make you want to protect someone's grandmother like she's your own family. But the contract was the worst and best decision I ever made. Worst because it put you in this position. Best because it brought you into my life." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. "What do we do now?" I whispered. Before he could answer, Margaret's voice came from the doorway. "Mr. Johnson, there's a young woman here to see you. Says her name is Sarah Delacroix." My heart stopped. Sarah. My best friend since childhood. My loudmouth, impulsive, protective as a mother bear best friend. "Oh no," I breathed. "Friend of yours?" Mike asked. "My best friend, who probably just read that article and is here to either rescue me or murder you." "Possibly both." Margaret cleared her throat. "She's quite insistent." We could hear Sarah's voice carrying from the foyer. "I don't care if he's the President of the United States. I want to see Alice right now." "I should go talk to her," I said. "We'll go together," Mike said firmly. "Whatever happens, we face it together." We found Sarah in the foyer, looking like a tiny avenging angel in her nurse scrubs and sneakers. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her green eyes were blazing with fury, and she was tapping her foot in a way that would have terrified me even if I wasn't already on the verge of a breakdown. "Alice Marie Delacroix," she said the moment she saw me, using my full name like she had when we were 10 and I'd gotten us both in trouble. "What the hell is going on?" "Sarah, I can explain." "Can you?" "Because according to the newspaper, my best friend, who I thought was struggling to pay rent and working herself to death at her grandmother's bakery, is apparently engaged to Mr. Moneybags here and has been for weeks without telling me. It's complicated. Complicated." Sarah's voice went up an octave. "Alice, there are pictures of you in a dress that costs more than my car, dancing with a man who looks like he stepped off a movie poster, and you didn't think to mention this to your best friend." Mike stepped forward slightly, and I could see him switching into businessman mode. "Miss Delacroix, I'm Michael Johnson. Perhaps we could all sit down and discuss this calmly." Sarah's gaze swiveled to him like a laser sight finding its target. "Oh, you're Michael Johnson." The man who swept my best friend off her feet so quickly that she forgot to tell anyone about it. How convenient that you also happened to pay off her family's debts right around the same time. Mike's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I see you've read the article." "Every word." "And you know what doesn't add up? Alice has been my best friend for 15 years. She tells me everything, every bad date, every work crisis, every random thought that pops into her head. But somehow she forgot to mention that she met the love of her life." "Sarah," I tried again. but she held up a hand. No, Alice. Something's not right here. This whole thing smells fishier than the hospital cafeteria on tuna melt day. I looked at Mike, seeing my own panic reflected in his eyes. Sarah was like a bloodhound when she sensed something was wrong, and she'd known me too long to buy any story we could construct. You want the truth? I said finally. That would be nice for a change. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was about to jump off a cliff. The truth is, it started as a business arrangement. Sarah's eyes went wide. A business arrangement? Mike needed a wife for family reasons. I needed money to save the bakery, so we made a deal. Oh my God. Sarah sank onto the nearest chair. Oh my God, Alice. You entered into a fake marriage? Are you insane? Probably, I admitted. And now? I looked at Mike, this complicated man who'd turned my world upside down in the best and worst possible ways. Now we're in love with each other and everything's falling apart. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying both of us with the intensity of someone who'd spent years reading people's vital signs. Well, she said finally, this is either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or the most catastrophic. I'm not sure which. Join the club, Mike said dryly. So what's the plan? Because from where I'm sitting, you two have about 5 seconds before this whole thing explodes in your faces. Before either of us could answer, Mike's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and paled. It's Richard, he said. We all stared at the phone as it continued to ring, each tone sounding like a countdown to disaster. Answer it, I said quietly. Let's find out what he wants. Mike answered on the last ring. Richard. Even from across the room, we could hear Richard's smug voice through the speaker. Hello, Michael. Enjoying your morning? I do hope you've seen the paper. What do you want? A meeting, 1 hour, my office. Bring your lovely fiancée. I think she'll want to hear what I have to say. The line went dead. I looked at Mike, then at Sarah, then back at Mike. Well, I said with forced lightness, this should be fun. Richard Ashford's office was everything I'd expected from a man who collected other people's secrets for sport. Cold, intimidating, and designed to make visitors feel small. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city, while expensive artwork lined the walls like trophies of conquest. Richard himself sat behind a massive mahogany desk, wearing a smile that reminded me of a shark who'd just spotted blood in the water. Michael, Alice, he said, not bothering to stand. How wonderful to see you both again so soon. Sarah had insisted on coming with us, claiming she wouldn't miss this for the world. She sat beside me now, her nurse's training evident in the way she assessed Richard like he was a particularly unpleasant patient. Let's skip the pleasantries, Mike said, his voice deadly calm. What do you want? Straight to business. I always admired that about you. Richard opened a manila folder on his desk. Though I have to say, your choice in business partners has become questionable. He slid a photograph across the desk. It was from last night's gala, Mike and me on the dance floor, looking at each other like the rest of the world had ceased to exist. Beautiful picture, isn't it? The society photographer captured something quite magical. Young love in bloom. His smile turned predatory. Of course, we both know the truth is far less romantic. Which is, I asked, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. Which is that this entire relationship is a sham, a business transaction disguised as a romance. He opened another folder. I have documentation of the payment made to clear your family's debts, Alice. The same day you and Michael had your first meeting. Curious timing, wouldn't you say? Mike's hand found mine under the table, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture of support that felt entirely real. You're fishing, Richard, Mike said. Circumstantial evidence isn't proof. Isn't it? Richard pulled out another document. What about this, then? My blood turned to ice. It was a copy of our contract, or at least part of it. The section clearly outlining the 12-month arrangement and the financial compensation. How did you get that? Mike demanded. I have my sources. The question is, what do you think your beloved grandmother would say if she knew her precious grandson hired a wife like she was a piece of furniture? The threat hung in the air like poison. Eleanor, with her sharp mind and loving heart, would be devastated to learn that Mike's happiness was an elaborate lie designed to comfort her in her final months. What do you want? I asked quietly. Smart girl. I want Michael's controlling shares in Johnson Industries. Sign them over to me, and this unfortunate evidence disappears. Refuse, and tomorrow's headline will make today's article look like a love letter. You're insane if you think I'll hand over my family's company to you, Mike said. Are you willing to destroy your grandmother's last months for it? Are you willing to destroy Alice's reputation? Because make no mistake, when this story breaks, she'll be painted as a gold-digging opportunist who exploited a grieving man. Sarah spoke for the first time since we'd arrived. You know what I think? Richard turned to her with barely concealed irritation. I'm sorry. And you are? I'm the person who's known Alice longer than anyone in this room. And I think you're making a massive mistake. How so? Sarah stood up, and despite being the smallest person in the room, she somehow commanded everyone's attention. You're assuming this is still fake. Richard's confident smile faltered slightly. Excuse me? You heard me. You've done all this research, gathered all this evidence, built this whole case around the idea that Mike and Alice are still pretending. But what if they're not? Don't be ridiculous. It's clearly a business arrangement. That started as a business arrangement, Sarah corrected. But I've been watching them since I walked into that house this morning. I've seen the way Mike looks at Alice when he thinks no one's watching. I've seen how Alice lights up when he smiles. I've seen two people who started fake and ended up real. Richard scoffed. Even if that were true, it doesn't change the facts. The contract exists. The arrangement was made under false pretenses. Actually, came a new voice from the doorway. I think it changes everything. We all turned to see Eleanor Johnson standing in the entrance, leaning heavily on her walking stick, but radiating the kind of authority that made billionaires tremble. Grandmother, Mike started, but she held up a hand. I think I've heard quite enough, thank you. She moved into the room with surprising grace, and I noticed Richard had gone pale. Mr. Ashford, I believe you have something that belongs to my family. Mrs. Johnson, I don't know what you think you heard, but I heard every word, Eleanor said calmly. Amazing what modern technology can do. My grandson was kind enough to call me from the car and leave the line open. I've been listening from the lobby for the past 10 minutes. My heart stopped. She'd heard everything. The contract, the fake relationship, all of it. Now then, Eleanor continued, settling into the chair Richard hastily vacated for her. Let me explain a few things about business, young man. First, attempting to blackmail a Johnson rarely ends well for the blackmailer. Second, that contract you're so proud of having was invalidated the moment my grandson and his fiancée fell in love. That's not how contracts work, Richard sputtered. It is when the contract was created under false pretenses. You see, I knew about their arrangement from the beginning. I also knew it wouldn't last a week before they realized what I saw immediately, that they were perfect for each other. I stared at Eleanor, my mind reeling. You knew? Of course I knew, dear. I didn't build a business empire by being naive about human nature. Michael came to me 3 weeks ago, desperately worried about my health, and convinced he needed to find a wife to make me happy. I told him he was being ridiculous, but he was determined. She turned to Mike with a fond but exasperated expression. So I let him go through with his elaborate plan, knowing full well that any woman who could put up with his stubbornness for more than 5 minutes was either a saint or someone who genuinely cared about him. But the contract, Richard tried again. The contract, Eleanor said firmly, was a young man's misguided attempt to make his dying grandmother happy. It became irrelevant the moment genuine feelings developed. And they did develop, Mr. Ashford. Anyone with eyes can see that. She reached into her purse and pulled out her own phone. Now, I've taken the liberty of recording this entire conversation. I believe attempted extortion is still illegal in New York, isn't it? I should probably mention that my legal team includes half the Supreme Court. Richard's face had gone from pale to green. Mrs. Johnson, surely we can work something out. Oh, we can, Eleanor said sweetly. You can return that contract to my grandson, you can forget you ever heard of my family, and you can pray I don't decide to mention this little incident to your board of directors. I understand your company's been struggling lately. Shame if potential investors heard about your creative business practices. The threat was delivered with such elegant venom that I almost felt sorry for Richard. Almost. Within minutes, Richard had handed over the contract and all copies of his evidence, looking like a man who'd just realized he'd brought a knife to a gunfight against someone carrying a nuclear weapon. As we left his office, I felt like I was walking in a dream. The contract was torn up, the threat was neutralized, and Eleanor knew everything. Mrs. Johnson, I said as we waited for the elevator, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to hurt you. Eleanor took my hand in her surprisingly strong grip. My dear girl, the only thing that would hurt me is seeing my grandson throw away the best thing that ever happened to him because he's too proud to admit he fell in love. She turned to Mike, who was still looking shell-shocked. As for you, young man, I suggest you stop overthinking this and ask this lovely woman to marry you properly. And I don't mean with some ridiculous contract. I mean with a ring, a proposal, and a promise to love her for the rest of your life. Mike looked at me, and I saw hope and fear and love all warring in his expression. What if she says no? He asked quietly. What if she says yes? Eleanor countered. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, but none of us moved to get in. Alice, Mike said, and my name sounded like a prayer on his lips. I know this is crazy. I know we've only known each other for a week. I know this started with the worst possible foundation. But I also know that somewhere between signing that ridiculous contract and this moment, you became the most important thing in my world. He dropped to one knee right there in the hallway, pulling a ring box from his pocket that definitely hadn't been there an hour ago. Alice Delacroix, he said, his voice shaking slightly. Will you marry me? Not because of a contract or an arrangement or because my grandmother is standing right here filming this on her phone. I am not filming, Eleanor protested, though she definitely was. But because I love you. Because you make me laugh and challenge me and make me want to be better. Because you stood up to Vivian Morrison and put Richard Ashford in his place and somehow made my grandmother love you in 5 minutes. Because you're brave and kind and beautiful, and you make the best chocolate chip cookies I've ever tasted. I looked down at this incredible man proposing to me in a corporate hallway while his grandmother provided commentary, and my best friend recorded everything on her own phone. You know, I said, fighting back tears of joy, this is either the most romantic proposal in history or the most ridiculous. Can't it be both? He asked hopefully. I looked at the ring, a perfect solitaire that caught the fluorescent light and threw rainbows. Then at Mike's hopeful face, then at Eleanor's encouraging smile, then at Sarah's thumbs up. Yes, I said simply. Yes, yes, obviously yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger with shaking hands, then stood up and kissed me with such passion that I forgot we were in a public hallway. When we finally broke apart, Eleanor was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Well, she said briskly, I suppose we have a wedding to plan. 6 months later, Alice, stop fidgeting with your veil. It's perfect. I turned to find Eleanor standing in the doorway of the bridal suite, looking radiant in her powder blue mother-of-the-groom dress. The past 6 months had been kinder to her than the doctors had predicted. Apparently, the joy of planning a real wedding for her beloved grandson was better medicine than any chemotherapy. I can't help it, I said, smoothing the silk and lace for the 100th time. What if I trip? What if I forget my vows? What if you stop overthinking and just enjoy the fact that you're about to marry the man of your dreams? Sarah interrupted,
appearing beside Eleanor with a glass of champagne and wearing the most beautiful sage-green bridesmaid dress I'd ever seen. "The man of my dreams who I met through a fake marriage contract," I pointed out. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real." Eleanor moved closer, her eyes twinkling with that familiar mischief. "My dear, do you think I would have gone through 6 months of wedding planning, including 3 dress fittings, 2 cake tastings, and listening to your grandmother and Margaret argue about flower arrangements, for something that wasn't real?" The mention of my grandmother made me smile. Estelle Delacroix had taken to Eleanor like a duck to water, and the two of them had become an unstoppable force of wedding planning chaos. The fact that they'd only had one major disagreement, roses versus peonies, they'd compromised with both, was nothing short of miraculous. "She has a point," Sarah said, adjusting my necklace, the pearl choker that had belonged to Eleanor's grandmother. "Besides, have you seen the way Mike's been pacing around here all morning? Margaret said he's changed ties 4 times and asked her at least 6 times if she's sure you haven't changed your mind. He's nervous too." "Terrified," Eleanor confirmed cheerfully. "It's quite sweet, actually. I haven't seen him this worked up since he was 7 and had to recite a poem at the school Christmas pageant." A soft knock at the door interrupted us. "5 minutes, ladies," came Margaret's voice. My stomach did a complete somersault. In 5 minutes, I would walk down the aisle of the same church where Eleanor and her late husband had been married 58 years ago. In 5 minutes, I would promise to love, honor, and cherish Michael Johnson for the rest of my life. Not because of a contract. Not because of money or convenience or family obligations. Because I loved him with every fiber of my being. "Ready?" Sarah asked, handing me my bouquet, white roses and peonies, the compromise flowers that had somehow become perfect. "Ready," I said, and meant it. The doors opened, and Sarah walked down the aisle first, followed by little Emma, Margaret's granddaughter, scattering rose petals with the serious concentration of someone performing brain surgery. Then it was my turn.
The church was filled with everyone who mattered. Eleanor in the front row, beaming with joy, my grandmother beside her, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, Margaret and the bakery staff, Mike's business associates, and Sarah's entire family, who had adopted me as their own years ago. But I only had eyes for the man waiting for me at the altar. Mike stood tall and gorgeous in his black tuxedo, his usually perfect hair slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it.
When our eyes met, his face broke into a smile so radiant it could have powered the entire city. As I walked toward him, I remembered our first meeting, how I'd thought he was arrogant and impossible, how he'd assumed I wouldn't fall in love with him, how wrong we'd both been about everything. "Hi," he whispered when I reached him, taking my hands in his. "Hi yourself," I whispered back. "You look—" He shook his head, unable to finish. "God, Alice, you're so beautiful I can't breathe." "Good thing I'm not marrying you for your poetry skills," I teased, and he laughed. That wonderful, genuine laugh that had first made me realize he was more than just a pretty face and a fat wallet. The ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of, and nothing like I'd expected. We'd written our own vows, and when Mike spoke about how I'd taught him that love wasn't something to be negotiated or contracted, but something to be freely given, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. When it was my turn, I looked into his storm-gray eyes and spoke from my heart. "Michael, 6 months ago you offered me a business arrangement, and I thought I was so smart for accepting it. I thought I could keep my heart separate from my head, my feelings separate from the facts. But you made that impossible from day one. You made it impossible because you're kind to housekeepers and protective of grandmothers, and because you make terrible jokes and think they're hilarious. You made it impossible because you see the best in people, even when they can't see it in themselves. You made it impossible because loving you isn't a choice. It's as natural as breathing." By the time I finished, Mike was crying openly, and I was pretty sure half the congregation was sobbing. "You may kiss the bride," the minister said, and Mike didn't need to be told twice. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise.
When we broke apart, the church erupted in applause and cheers. "Ladies and gentlemen," the minister announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Michael Johnson." As we walked back down the aisle hand in hand, I caught sight of Eleanor, who was clapping enthusiastically despite the tears streaming down her face. She caught my eye and mouthed, "Perfect," and I knew she meant it. The reception was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the same place where we'd had our first public appearance as a couple. But tonight, instead of pretending, we were celebrating the real thing. "So," Mike said as we swayed together during our first dance, "any regrets about marrying a man you met through a fake marriage contract?" "Only one," I said, and his face fell slightly. "What's that?" "I regret that it took us 6 months to do this properly." I smiled up at him. Though I have to admit, our origin story is going to be interesting to explain to our kids someday. "Our kids?" His eyes lit up with hope and joy. "Well, unless you're planning on this being another 12-month arrangement." "Alice Johnson," he said, spinning me gently, "I'm planning on this being a forever arrangement. No contracts, no clauses, no expiration dates, just us for the rest of our lives." "I can live with that," I said, and kissed him as our family and friends cheered around us. Later, as the party wound down, I found Eleanor sitting at a table with my grandmother, both of them looking exhausted but happy. "Thank you," I said, sitting beside Eleanor and taking her hand. "For everything. For seeing through our charade, for protecting us, for planning the most beautiful wedding in history." "My dear," Eleanor said, squeezing my hand. "Thank you for giving my grandson something I never could. The knowledge that he's loved for who he is, not what he has. And thank you," my grandmother added with a mischievous smile, "for giving me the most interesting granddaughter-in-law story I'll ever have to tell." As the evening came to an end, Mike and I stood together on the museum steps, looking out at the city that had brought us together in the most unlikely way. "So, Mrs. Johnson," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind, "what's next?" "Well, Mr. Johnson," I said, leaning back against his chest, "I was thinking we could start with a real honeymoon, somewhere tropical, where we can forget about contracts and business arrangements and just be us. I like the sound of that. And after the honeymoon?" "After the honeymoon, we go home. We expand the bakery. I'm thinking we could open a second location. You continue taking over the world, one business deal at a time, and we live happily ever after." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He spun me around to face him, his eyes serious. "Alice, I need you to know something." "What?" "That ridiculous contract was the best mistake I ever made. Even though it almost destroyed everything. Especially because it almost destroyed everything. Because it taught me that some things are worth fighting for. That love isn't about perfect circumstances or careful planning. Sometimes the best things in life come from the most imperfect beginnings." I stood on my tiptoes and kissed him, tasting champagne and forever on his lips. "I love you, Michael Johnson. I love you too, Alice Johnson. Contract or no contract, fake or real, I'm yours. Forever." As we drove away into the night, toward our honeymoon and our future and whatever adventures awaited us, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us together. It had started with a lie. It had grown into something real. And now, it was becoming something eternal. Sometimes the best love stories begin with the worst reasons. Sometimes the most real thing in your life starts as the most fake. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to marry your favorite mistake. 1 year later. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Mike asked for the third time, adjusting his tie nervously. "Positive," I said, smoothing down my dress and checking my reflection one last time. Though I have to admit, it's weird being back here. We were standing outside the same lawyer's office where we'd first met, almost exactly 2 years ago. But this time, we weren't here to sign a marriage contract. We were here to sign adoption papers. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson?" The secretary smiled at us warmly. "He's ready for you now." Inside the office, our lawyer, a different one this time, thank God, had the papers spread out on his desk. Beside them sat a small pile of photographs and documents that represented 6 months of home visits, background checks, and interviews. "Well," he said, smiling broadly, "I have to say, in 20 years of family law, I've never seen a more enthusiastic approval from the adoption agency. Congratulations. You're officially approved to adopt baby Grace." I felt tears spring to my eyes as Mike squeezed my hand. Baby Grace, 6 months old, born to a teenage mother who'd made the brave decision to give her up for adoption and who'd specifically chosen us after reading our letter. "When can we bring her home?" Mike asked, his voice thick with emotion. "As soon as you sign these papers. She's actually waiting in the nursery next door with one of our social workers." 20 minutes later, I was holding our daughter for the first time. Grace was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and the most beautiful dark eyes I'd ever seen. When Mike gently touched her cheek, she turned toward his finger, and I watched my strong, successful husband melt completely. "Hello, beautiful," he whispered. "I'm your daddy, and this is your mommy, and we love you so much already." "She's perfect," I breathed, unable to take my eyes off her. "Just like her mother," Mike said, kissing my forehead. As we left the building, this time with our daughter in my arms instead of a contract in Mike's briefcase, I marveled at how much our lives had changed. The bakery had expanded to 3 locations and was more successful than ever. Mike had taken over as CEO of Johnson Industries when Eleanor decided to retire and focus on being the world's most doting grandmother-in-law. We'd bought a house in the suburbs, still beautiful, but with a yard for children to play in and a kitchen big enough for me to test new recipes. And Eleanor had defied every doctor's prediction and was still going strong, insisting that the secret to longevity was having something to live for. She'd already bought enough baby clothes to dress quintuplets and had started a college fund that would probably make Grace the richest baby in New York. "So," Mike said as we settled Grace into her car seat, "ready to take our daughter home?" "Our daughter," I repeated, loving the sound of it. "I like the sound of that. Better than fake fiancé?" "Much better than fake fiancé." As we drove home to our new life as a family of 3, I thought about the contract that had started it all. It was probably still in Mike's desk drawer somewhere, though we'd never looked at it again after that day in Richard's office. We didn't need it anymore. We had something better than a contract now. We had love. We had trust. We had a beautiful daughter and a lifetime of happiness ahead of us. And we had the knowledge that sometimes the most ridiculous beginnings lead to the most perfect endings. "Alice," Mike said as we pulled into our driveway. "Thank you." "For what?" "For signing that ridiculous contract. For taking a chance on me. For making me believe in love stories." I looked at our sleeping daughter, then at my husband, this wonderful man who'd started as a stranger with a crazy proposition and had become my everything. "Thank you for making this the best love story I could have imagined." And as we carried our daughter into our home, into our life, into our happily ever after, I knew that no contract could have guaranteed what we'd found together. Love, it turned out, was the one thing that couldn't be negotiated. It could only be freely given, gratefully received, and cherished forever. The end.